So God has been leading us on a journey, amen? He's been leading us on a great journey. It's a journey that seems to be a lot about water. And this morning is no different. We got one more water story for you this morning. 2 weeks ago, I asked you to pray for 5 young new families. And I've been hearing you talk, and I know that you are listening, you are praying, and you are listening for God to show you who that you need to invite to church and who we can pray for. And then last week we looked at the importance of setting up memorials to show where God has already been faithful, but then also calls us to move forward. And like I said, this journey seems to be bringing us lots of stories about water. And as Dan just mentioned, we have these postcards. This one even looks kind of cooler, the one I put on the screen. But it says, "You're invited back to church Sunday and tailgate picnic, September 16th, 11 a.m. Come to Sunday worship wearing your favorite football." I think that says high school, college, or pro teams gears. And following worship, we will have a tailgate picnic. If you have any questions about the tailgate picnic, go see Dan. Because there are some probably things you're probably thinking, do we need to bring anything? And it was cool. This conversation was great. It was like, so is this like a bring a dish to pass kind of thing? I'm like, no. If you are our guest, you just come. You just show up. So I thought it was really great. And so I would ask your prayers for several things as we prepare for this. Be praying that people would accept our invitations to be part of this. Be praying that people would be receptive to the gospel, because there are people who are not receptive to the gospel, and we want to share the gospel that morning. And I would ask you to pray for me as I start preparing the message for that morning, because believe it or not, it's probably going to have something to do with water. So this is kind of like an H2O series in a way. But I want to thank you for the way that you have responded to the challenges, both last week and the week before. I believe if I looked at those cards correctly, we have enough greeters for every week, and we have enough nursery workers for every week. Yes! That is awesome. And I believe God is getting ready. And I've said, some of you probably getting tired of me saying this, because I've been saying it for 2.5 years already. I believe God is going to do something special if we just continue to seek His face. I believe God is doing something as we pray to reach new generations for Christ. So our journey this morning continues with 2 familiar stories. And I'm going to set up the story because I didn't realize what the progression of these stories was. In chapter 14 of Matthew, which is where we're going to be this morning, we hear the story of Herod Antipas. He is the son of King Herod, and we find out that John the Baptist has died because of Herod. He was a jealous man. He wasn't real happy with what John the Baptist was saying, because Herod had several wives, and John the Baptist said, "Hey, you're evil. You need to get your act together." And Herod wasn't too happy about that, so he put him in prison. So anyway, there was a big party. There was a big party happening at the palace, and Herod's wife's daughter did a little dance, and the king was very pleased, and he said, "I will give you anything up to half my kingdom. What do you want?" Now, Herodias, who was the somethingeth wife of Herod, whispered in her daughter's ear and said, "Tell him you want the head of John the Baptist on a platter." So she goes, "Okay." She goes, "I want the head of John the Baptist on a platter." Well, the king didn't know what to do, because while he wasn't real happy with John the Baptist, the last thing he wanted to do was kill John the Baptist, because he knew there would be riots if he did kill John the Baptist. So he does it. He's afraid because he already made his vow, and so he does it. He brings the head of John the Baptist on a platter. And Jesus hears the news that John the Baptist has been killed, and he tries to go off to be alone. Now this is kind of interesting to hear this story, because just before Matthew tells the story of John the Baptist being beheaded, he tells about how Jesus was in his hometown Nazareth. And what happened in Nazareth? Well, Jesus is reading the gospel there, and he's telling the story, and people are like, "You're Jesus. You're Mary and Joseph's boy. What are you trying to do? Tell us." I mean, it would just be like, think of it, Dan's around town, and think of Dan as Jesus. And he's walking around Eldred and say, "Hey, you need to believe in me." And people are like, "You're just Jan and Boyd's boy. What are you doing, A prophet has no honor in his hometown. So think about, Jesus had just experienced this rejection in Nazareth. Jesus had just experienced this death of his cousin, John the Baptist. And he goes off to be alone. But what happens? He's out in the wilderness, and people start showing up. I mean, imagine being down in, Keating Summit. Out in the middle of nowhere. It's 15 miles to Port Allegheny. It's 15 miles to Emporium. And you're out there, you're trying to pray, and people start showing up. Thousands of people start showing up for you to heal them and for you to take care of them. And so that's what happens. These people show up as Jesus is trying to just be alone. And finally, it's late. It's 15 miles to the nearest town. The disciples are Jesus. What are we going to do? Send the people home so that we can go get something to eat. Because it's 15 miles to the nearest place. There's no McDonald's. There's no Greasy Spoon to send them to. And Jesus says, "You feed them." What? What? Jesus, we've got these 5 loaves, and we've got these 2 fish. We can't feed 10,000 people with 5 loaves and 2 fish. Jesus says, "Bring them to me." Disciples were, "I don't know what he's got up his sleeve today, but all right." So they bring the 5 loaves and 2 fish, and he blesses them. Now you're probably saying, Jesus only fed 5,000. Well, but he's fed 5,000 men. There were women and children as well. So even if there was only 1 child and 1 woman for every man, that's 15,000 people. I think Jesus really did quite a miracle when you think about it. And isn't it interesting that after they feed all the people, they gather up 12 baskets. Now, some people think you're thinking peach basket full. No, we're talking little, because the disciples carried little baskets on the side of their waist for lunch and stuff. And so, guess what? Jesus fed everybody till they were full, and there was enough for all the disciples to have lunch the next day. Isn't that cool? We serve an amazing God. And so they had this real loaves and fishes moment. But what did they have to have? They didn't have enough faith for themselves, because they said, "Jesus, send them home." Jesus says, "Bring what you got to me." That's what he asked us to do. He said, "Bring what you got to me, and I will multiply." So they learned this little faith lessons. And so now some people would say, that would never happen today, would it? Let me tell you a story. This is Red Rocks. Go back to the one.
Yeah. Sorry.
This is Red Rocks Wesleyan Church in Keams Canyon, Arizona. If Keating Summit is out in the middle of nowhere, this is on the edge of the earth. I mean, it is out in the northeast corner of Arizona, and How many of you have heard of Winslow, Arizona? You know, the Eagle song. Let's just say it's about a 4-hour trip from Flagstaff. If any of you have ever been to Flagstaff, it's a 4-hour drive, and the last hour is on rutted roads that would make Northwest Pennsylvania roads look like a superhighway. You know that saying, choose your rut carefully? Yes. LBU was Washburn, and I had this pickup truck with a trailer on the back. And I felt every bump for miles. The road pretty much looked like that right there. You can kind of see what the driveway looks like. Pastor Darwin Sosi is the pastor there. And we went out there to fix the roof. You can see the roof was in pretty bad shape. And just everything was in bad shape. And so we went out there on a mission trip. And so we brought all the food to feed ourselves. And we knew that on one of the nights that we were going to have a service. And we were going to invite the Native Americans, the Navajos who were there. And so they put the word out. And so there were 20 of us. Now we had enough pork chops for about 30 people because we didn't know that we were going to do this. Was sort of the last minute thing. And so we put out the word and, well, we said, hey, we're going to have dinner and we're going to have worship following. 50 people showed up. We have 70 people and we've got pork chops for 30. You know what God did? God brought what we had. I can't. This is the Navajos and our missions team, and we're feasting from this table. It's amazing how in the world we fed 70 people with 30 pork chops. I'll never know. And everybody ate to completion. Everybody ate till they were full. It was a real loaves and fishes moment. But we simply gave what we had to God, and He provided the increase. And God continues to ask us to step out on faith. Sometimes that step out on faith is simply to step into new territory that is completely unfamiliar to us. Remember the priest last week? Joshua, why do we got to step in the water? Why don't you just put your staff in the water like Moses did? We've never done it that way before. We're probably, with this Baptist Church Sunday, we're probably doing something that we never did before. But it's a way to continue to reach people, to connect people. I believe that God is calling us to step out of our comfort zone for the sake of the gospel. What can we do to better reach the people of McKean County? Because each person is a lost soul who right now, without us doing anything, is going to an eternity in hell. And we got to get busy. Actually, let me say this. I really believe that McCray Brook is in a unique position that none of the other churches in our little ministerium are in a position. I really believe that we could make a difference like no other church in our community could. I believe in you guys that much. I believe in that, our God, that much, that we can do something different, because one of the things that we have is the power of the Holy Spirit working in our lives. Not that I don't love my brothers and sisters in all the other churches, but if we are willing to step out of our comfort zone, there's no telling how we could reach our community for Jesus Christ. But the story doesn't end there. The story doesn't end with the feeding of the 5,000. Jesus sends his disciples to the boat. He says, get back in the boat. And Jesus sends the people home and finally goes, I'm all alone. I can pray. Finally, it's been an exhausting 48 hours for Jesus. But as he's praying up on the mountain, he sees his disciples out in the boat. He sees the wind come up and he sees they're struggling. They're rowing against the tide. Verse 24 of Matthew, let's take a look at this. Meanwhile, the disciples were in trouble far away from land, for a strong wind had risen and they were fighting heavy waves. About 3 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came toward them walking on the water. And when Jesus saw him walking on the water, they were terrified, and in fear they cried out, "It's a ghost!" But Jesus spoke to them at once. Oh, wouldn't you like to hear these words? Don't be afraid, that he said. Take courage, I am here. Then Peter called to him, Lord, if it's really you, tell me to come to you walking on the water. Yes, come, Jesus says. So Peter went over the side of the boat and walked on the water towards Jesus. Wow! And we often forget about that part. We like to concentrate on this next part. But when he saw the strong wind and the waves, he was terrified and began to sink. Save me, Lord, he shouted. Jesus immediately reached out and grabbed him. You have so little faith. Why did you doubt me? When they climbed back into the boat, the wind stopped and the disciples worshipped him. You really are the Son of God, they exclaimed. After they crossed the lake, they landed at Gennesaret. When the people recognized Jesus, the news of his arrival spread quickly throughout the whole area. And guess what? Soon people were bringing all their sick to be healed. They begged him to let the sick just touch the fringe of his robe, and all who touched him were healed. Did you know that more than just one person, did you know that more than one person besides the lady with the issue of blood was healed just by touching the hem of Jesus' garment? Yeah. Matter of fact, in Acts, it tells that people just long to be in the disciples' shadow to be healed. What kind of power is that? That's the power that comes from the Holy Spirit. And I believe that Jesus sent the disciples back onto the sea to test their faith and see if they learned their lesson from the feeding of the 5,000. So Jesus sees the disciples out in the boat. They're rowing and it's just crazy. And Jesus goes out to help them on the water. And they think, oh, it's a ghost. And you would think that guys who had made their living fishing on the Sea of Galilee would be used to this kind of storm, that they would be used to this. But one of the things that we need to understand from a Western culture is that in the Eastern culture, many believed large seas, like the Sea of Galilee, to be a gateway to the underworld. They thought that this was the great abyss. And so Jesus was simply a spirit from the underworld coming up onto the lake. And they were terrified. And then Jesus speaks, and I'm sure as soon as they heard the words, they're like, oh, it's Jesus. He says, do not be afraid. Take courage, for I am here. Now, what's really interesting is as I looked up the Greek actually reads I am, which is the word, or it actually reads the I am is here. What do we know about the I am? Remember Moses in the burning bush? I am that I am. Jesus says to the disciples, the I am is here. Whoa, this is Yahweh. This is the God of the angel armies, as I sang about earlier this morning. It's the word we use for Lord. And this is huge because the Jews would not use this name. They held it in such reverence because they would never want to misuse the name of God. This I am. And Peter hears Jesus' words of comfort. And we often get all over Peter's case for being so impetuous and for just being Peter. But Peter hears Jesus' words of comfort and says, hey, Jesus, can I come out on the water? And Jesus says, by all means, join the party out here in the storm. Can you imagine stepping over the edge of the boat and putting your feet down and thinking your feet's going to go through the water and all of a sudden it stays? You get up, put the other foot down. Now, you're right close to the boat, so if something goes wrong, you can just jump back in the boat. You're like, this is pretty cool. Keeps walking. Walks. Looking at Jesus. Guess what? Now he's too far from the boat. Jesus is still a little ways off. And all of a sudden, it's like, this is really cool, but is this water going to hold me all the way till I get to Jesus? He takes his eyes off of Jesus and he starts looking at the waves and starts sinking. He says, uses the same word, I am, help me. Immediately Jesus is by Peter's side and pulls him out. He says, okay, Peter, let me walk you back to the boat. And Jesus and Peter walk back to the boat. As soon as they step into the boat, the whole storm goes. You really are God. You really are the great I am. I want us to think about that story because so many times, like I said, we get so annoyed at Peter. But think about Peter. He was the only one of the disciples. There were 12 disciples sitting in the boat. And Peter says, I remember that feeding of the 5,000. And Jesus said we need to have faith. So, you know what? If that's Jesus out there, I want to join the Jesus party. I want to go out there and I want to walk on the water with Jesus. I'd rather be in the storm with Jesus. And so Peter stepped out of a boat. Now wait a second. They're on a big sea. It's a big storm. How many of you would step out of the relative comfort of the boat to step out onto the waves? I'm scared to death to be on boats if it's doing any kind of craziness. I like being on boats, but Peter stepped out of his comfort zone. Yes, the water was choppy. Yes, it was scary. Jesus and Peter walked in the storm with Jesus. And we often focus on the fact that Peter took his eyes off of Jesus. Peter was willing to step off the boat when nobody else was willing to leave the boat and to enter the storm with Jesus. So we have two lessons this morning. One, Jesus asks us to give him whatever we have, and he will provide the increase. The second story is Jesus is saying it's better to be in the storm with me than to be in the comfort. Sometimes that's hard to hear because we are creatures of comfort. We've talked about that. And I'd rather be in the storm with Jesus than be in my comfortable boat without Jesus. How about that? This past week I was able to attend a community meeting at Otto Eldred High School. I thought it was kind of cool. Mr. Splain invited all the clergy to come. Here's sort of a state of the district message. And it was here that I learned that we are we are a rural, poor school district. And that's where I learned about where the funding comes. They showed all kinds of pie graphs. And then he showed an interesting statistic. Pennsylvania, and one of the things I want to let you know that Otto Eldred School District is really dealing in some ways in their mission to educate students is dealing with the same thing as we are in making disciples of Jesus. Let's face it, Otto Eldred is a declining community. Otto Eldred is getting smaller, it's not getting bigger. Guess what? There are less students going to school 10 years ago than there are now, so about 100 less than 10 years ago. Our enrollment's in the 600 area. And so, but what do they want to do? They want to help kids here in Otto Eldred get a quality education. They want to prepare them for the real world. And I appreciate that. And so I thought, here they are. They're trying to serve. They're trying to serve less students. And they have to choose, okay, which programs do we really go with? And so it was really fascinating. One of the really fascinating things is, before I go on, is Pennsylvania is, I hate to say this, but Pennsylvania is one of the worst states in the nation at serving poor rural school districts than any other district in the nation, than any other state in the nation. Indiana sends the most money to rural schools. Pennsylvania sends the least. The rich schools get all the money, the poor schools don't, which is kind of sad. But he shared 3 goals in his message, and when I said, I'm like, wow, that's sort of what I've been preaching for the last 2 years that we've been here. Go ahead. Number 1, just what we've been talking about the last couple weeks. Remember the past. God has been faithful. You know what? God has gifted us with a unique history. You know what? We are not Eldred United Methodist Church. We are not St. Raphael's Catholic Church. We are not the Church of God. We are not Duke Center United Methodist. We are McCray Brook Wesleyan Church. Yes. And we have a unique DNA. God has been faithful. Remember the past. What has God called us to do? And we remembered those. And it was great to hear some of the stories. I was so happy to meet Marilyn. I love her enthusiasm. I love her energy. I'm like, where does she get it all from? I mean, she's just like, wow. But you know, it was that morning was electric because of the extra energy we had that morning. Secondly, we need to be responsible. What does that mean? We need to be good stewards of what God has entrusted us with. We need to make sure that we continue to take care of our facility. There's certain things that we need to do. And then thirdly, we need to be relevant. What does that mean? This is the scary one, actually, for all of us. We need to build toward the future. How do we continue to reach? How do we make changes to reach a culture that is increasingly skeptical of religion? Why are they skeptical of religion? How many weeks in a row now, if you get the Buffalo News on Sunday morning, how many weeks in a row, and it's been probably 25 weeks in a row now. Every morning on the Buffalo News on Sunday morning, there's one more story about another priest scandal. And if we think that, oh, well, that's just the Catholic Church, no, that kind of stuff's happening in the evangelical church as well. Matter of fact, not too long ago, a major evangelical leader who led one of the largest churches in America was found out to have been committing sexual immorality while he was pastoring the church. At first he denied it, and then when they finally got to the bottom of it, they were like, wow, we're sorry that we didn't believe the women. People are skeptical of who the church is because they say, church, the same stuff's happening in the church that's happening in the world. Why should we subject ourselves to that? So we need to build toward the future. We need to minister to the current culture without compromising biblical standards. You know what? The message of this word, for 2,000 years, the message of this word has not changed. The word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory, and he is full of grace and truth, and he came to die for us. He came to save us even when we weren't worthy of it. This message has not changed. But maybe we can do something different in our methods. The methods isn't important. The message is. You know, I've shared this story several times about the McKean County Fair and how we tried to enter exhibits, and it was just so confusing. Well, you know what? When people step out of their car into our parking lot, all of a sudden, when they're coming into our world, for us, we're very comfortable with our world. We know exactly how our world operates. We know that Pastor Dale's going to get up and he's going to sing a song, and then Pastor Pam's going to come up and introduce us into worship. Then Boyd's going to get up and lead us in a few songs, and then Pastor Dale's going to pray, and we're going to take the offering, and then we're going to have some kind of special music, and Pastor Dale's going to get up and preach. We know the routine. We know exactly what's going to happen. Well, you know what? A lot of people haven't grown up in church. You know, there's a lot of people who just haven't grown up in church. The most they know about church is the hymn Amazing Grace. They might know Amazing Grace. Because when you see a program on television, if they are in a church, guess what song they sing? Amazing Grace. Very rarely do they sing any other thing. Now, if they happen to listen to Family Life Radio, they're going through the channels on the radio and they happen to come across Family Life Radio, or if they have Sirius Satellite Radio and they come across the message, they might perhaps hear one of the songs that we sing. But for the most part, people have no idea what goes on in church. For all they know, we could be doing some kind of weird hocus pocus. And so it's scary for them to come into this building. And so we need to do everything that we can to break down the barriers, to say, you know what? It's not scary here. I like to say it this way. We're ordinary people, but we serve an extraordinary God. We are sinners saved by grace. Thank God we're still not sinners saved by grace. Because of His grace, He has saved us. And we are His children. But so many times we forget that people don't know that. It's a scary thing to come into church, especially when we all know each other and they don't know who we are. They're like, okay, I hope they don't do something weird. Hope they don't see. And most people wouldn't know us from the church in the Appalachians that maybe handle snakes. They don't know that we don't handle snakes. They might think, oh, I hope nothing weird happens. So I really want you to start thinking about how uncomfortable it is for people to come to church. It's not because they don't want to, but it's different. It's different. I like this last set of things that Mr. Splain gave. And I promise we're done. Build toward the future. How do we build toward the future? Our values. What do we believe? What is absolutely important? That Jesus died, that Jesus rose again, that Jesus is coming back, and if we don't receive Him, we could go to eternity in hell. That's important. Our product, what are we producing? If we're simply producing us to sit here in our pews every Sunday, well, maybe we need to work on our product. Thirdly, how are we making an impact? Are we making an impact in our community? When we leave this place on Sunday morning, are we making an impact in our community? And lastly, I've asked this question before, where will we be in 5 years? Where will we be 10 years in the future? Those are some great questions.